Hey guys, Mason here, Cardinal Gaming. Appreciate everybody clicking on the video, coming along on this little journey here to talk about the new gold standard for conditioning cards. Um, TCG Player has just put out this nice, beautiful PDF talking about conditioning and the practices that they have and the expectations when you buy a card on TCG Player. Kind of this rubric is what all these cards are compared to. And there's some things in there I agree with. There's some things that I don't agree with, and we'll go over them. And like I said, it's a very nice PDF that they have here. So very nice of them to make a PDF that is all of 8 pages long. And they have a table of contents for the rest of the 6 pages. But it's fine. It's beautiful. It's they did a great job. So we'll just go through it real quick, and I'll give you guys my thoughts and kind of like from a store's perspective, what I think about it. We're not gonna go through everything, but I'll paraphrase a little bit, so save you guys some time. Introduction just goes through and says talks about basically if we have more uniform standards of conditioning cards and what to expect at certain levels of those conditions, that basically we as a hobby as a whole can have more solid expectations and more higher standards for a certain grade, and just there are going to be far less disputes about what's a near mint versus light play versus moderate, and this kind of takes that guesswork and kind of that it could go either way kind of discretion out of there. There are some things in here, like I said, that I think are a little more convoluted than they need to be, or a little more complicated. But it is generally, as a whole, very good to have some sort of standard practice and some sort of standard level out there of what to expect if you buy a moderately played card. What kind of things you can expect, and what types of scuffs and damages, and just how handled that card is compared to some things. Now, TCG Player is making a very good definition right here with conditioning versus grading. The term grading in a plain and a raw card scenario just needs to be tossed out the window at this point. Grading is, as we see, the prevalence for that get more popular with PSAs, CGC, all those companies that are actually truly grading these cards on like a 1 to 10 scale. The playability side needs to really focus on saying things, conditioning cards. This is what condition this card is in, from a near mint, light play, yada yada yada, to damaged kind of level. There is some subjectivity to whether or not we need the 5 different levels. Why don't we have just like like instead of near mint, I wish it really was called like no played or not played condition. Just to indicate that it's like a pack fresh card, because we all know things straight out of the pack can be literally damaged. To put this all the way down to the scale to damage condition. So those types of things do exist, but this is a good system. Again, it's pretty uniform for people that play TCGs and people that manage and handle raw cards. This is a pretty good way of doing it. And again, changing the verbiage from grading to conditioning is just overall a better way to clarify and kind of distinguish raw cards from graded cards. So that's a good thing that they actually put out in here. This is really good. So talks about subjectivity and things like that. There's some variance. Not everybody's near mint is near mint, and not everybody's light play is light play. There's some bleed over and stuff like that. So there are a couple things that this addresses that have not been addressed before in TCG Player or any sort of conditioning and grading standard. And again, when we get there, we'll go through that. But a lot of these things really talk about things like imperfections and things like foil curling and things like that have not ever been addressed, at least on TCG Player's level. So it's interesting to see just how well fleshed out this is compared to what we were used to seeing through a lot of places. So this is the probably the most fun and interesting way of looking at all these different types of things that can be wrong with the card and these imperfection types. And it gives it a lot of great things about just an explanation, kind of like a little graphic here of what that kind of would look like on a card, and then terms that you could see were basically are synonymous or interchangeable with the terms that they have. Let's go. I'm just going to through them real quick and just kind of give you a better idea and talk about it a little bit. First one we have is edgeware. Edgeware is probably, particularly with older cards, kind of the more obvious and the main imperfection or defects that we see, just because of from handling and from like flipping things in binder pages and just not caring for cards. Edgeware is where it shows the most. It says terms like border wear, fraying, nicking, flaking, things like that on foil cards. There's a couple other terms that I would put on here as well. Whitening for Pokemon cards in particular, but for Magic cards as well, they whiten as well on the edges. And then what I call shine through, or again flaking. Flaking is on here, but flaking of the card surface from especially like a foil card where you can see the foil effect through that. I call it shine through. That it's just from wear and just from rubbing and friction, and just showing that this card has been handled and been moved around outside of just being in a pack. Scratches I think is pretty obvious, especially on hollows. Those can be either on hollow or even through a card, where you can see like the shine effect through a card. I'll just toss this up here. I don't know if you guys will be able to see it on this little camera, but this is a Shadowless Charizard that is in absolutely terrible condition, but you kind of see the foiling effect right there, kind of like through Charizard. That is more than just a scratch, I would say. He's got a pretty bad stomach wound all the way up through him. That it sucks, but yeah, I'm surrounded by bulk cards all the time, so this is very near and dear to me. We'll talk about scuffing. Scuffing is basically just I think it'll be like a cloudiness or just like a darkness color on the top of a card. Maybe you see this in things like hollows, where they kind of have like this like milky, cloudy effect over them. And even says here on the terms, scuffing, scratch groups, and clouding again. That's just from friction, just things rubbing on that card, and something like dirt and dust getting in between like a card sleeve and then going across a surface and rubbing causes that kind of stuff. Surface wear in general, again, it's talking about just general like from play, rubbing across the table, rubbing in the sleeve kind of thing. Things that affect the color of the card and the shininess. It could be like a dulling effect or something like that on a card. Grime happens very, very frequently. It says from handling use or poor storage. Poor storage is kind of okay, maybe. Grime can just happen from, especially with played cards. You'll see this on like card sleeves a lot. We call it hand cheese in the player realm. Basically, it's just like these brown specks that it's basically dirt or dust collecting from moisture, and this can happen even in sleeved and on the surface of cards in a sleeve or in a binder, where just if moisture or something gets trapped in there and then dust, something that gets caught in there, it'll start to accumulate to each other. It's kind of like raindrops or snowflakes, where that kind of just, if there's something that can bond to, they kind of just tend to stick together and clump together. So grime can happen like that. Hand cheese is pretty synonymous and pretty common to see on sleeves. And then if you don't play, if you play with cards without sleeves, yeah, you're gonna get that grimy hand cheese on there. Indents definitely happen. Things like rubbing a fingernail across a card, or something causing things. Ring dings, as I like to call them, or ring indentions on the edge of a card. That's an indentation. where it's not really like quite like the next category of a bend. A bend would actually be some sort of visible flexing of the card that you can see. And they have what's called a fault on here. A fault is an interesting term, and it particularly shows like the edge flares of the die cut on the very bottom right picture there. That is just a fault. It says imperfection in the cardstock from damage or liquid. I don't know if that is a great example of a fault or how that wouldn't fall into something else. It's kind of a weird terminology there. Particularly that in particular, that would definitely be like just like a bend or a crease on the corner of a card. And again, even straight out of the factory, particularly with like WotC era stuff and older Magic cards, where the die cuts when they go to press the cards and cut the cards out of the system. The edges in particular will have damage to them, just because when you go to cut a round, cutting a round circle or a round shape, it's not always smooth, and it can cause issues a lot. Keep going down just a little bit here, just a couple more. Damage, it shows particularly like a Sharpie mark or something written on that card. It also classifies tears, holes, sun damage, bleaching, and things like that being on the card. Remember, guys, a signed card is a damaged card. Remember, if you just get a card signed, it's damaged. Write your triggered comments down below. And then they classify defects as well. Defects, again, were not something that was typically thought of being in a type of conditioning guide, because it's particularly saying here a printing or manufacturing error. And they're talking about inking, blurring, miscuts, centering errors, hollow stamps being damaged, missing, or shifted. So things like the jungle errors, for example, would be a defect according to this guide, when things are just either shifted or missing completely from a card. And of course, we see a lot of these things as kind of makes things even more collectible. Things that are really, really badly miscut, where you have things like the alignment dots or the printing dots that are visible on the card. As these cards get faster and faster turned out, and they're making more and more of these cards all the time, a lot of the stuff tends to slip through the quality control, and we see a lot more of that just out in the public. And with the uptick of people posting this stuff on like the internet and online and Twitter and Facebook and all these places, we just tend to see more of these. I don't know if there's actually maybe a higher percentage now. It just seems like we're seeing a lot of them just because of so many, there's millions and millions of cards being printed. Of course, there's going to be things that slip out of there. We just tend to see it a lot more. And according to TCG Player now, whereas that used to be not, I did not consider an ink dot or something like that to be a defect in conditioning a card. But here they're saying that it is, and is something that needs to be taken into account when looking at a card. And then they talk about, this is kind of a weird little category here, imperfection severity. And they have a measurement of 1 centimeter for slight or less than 2% of the overall card, with any sort of these types of issues on top here. So, again, this is probably a little more stringent, or I guess strict, than it needs to be. I just think of things just being like, yeah, this is a slight edge wear or a moderate edge wear, or a major thing, which is just pushing into like the damage category. It's just kind of weird that a company that has millions and millions of cards that they have passed through their hands, that they're taking the time to look at this and be like considering this kind of stuff. I doubt that TCG Player is using this as like a guide for like bulk, because this would take a phenomenal amount of time. And as you see, as we go down here, we'll come back to that part. They're talking about points and a point system. We have 3 points for a near mint, 6 points for light play, 12 points, and then they give these minor, moderate, major things through here. And again, this is just a lot. It's a lot to be like, okay, this has 24 points of all these things. This is a heavy played card. I really doubt they're going through this process for a heavy played card, a TCG player, especially again with bulk cards. I would think that they probably have a way of expediting this process and maybe not being as rigorous as this wants us to believe. But maybe they are. Maybe they're using it as a reference, and once you get really good at it, you can probably go pretty quick. Probably, I would say so. And again, they're going through as things like things that are not allowed, as things like surface wear, grime, bending, faults or damage. Faults again fall in the category of little flips and edges and edge barriers and peelings and things like that. And then again, things like defects and things like that, again, from manufacturing, would still possibly, if it's slight, again, based on their terms of measuring, getting out the ruler and going through and making sure it's only a slight, not a minor a damage, that falls in the near mint. This is kind of similar to what we use for a near mint card for what we call cardinal near mint is basically what we call it. Near mint would be basically one sort of, especially like again, edge wear is most prevalent. So something like an incident of edge wear, of whitening and things like that, either on the front or on the back. If you only have one of those, we consider it near mint. If we go to light play, it'd be like 2 instances of that on the front, or 2 instances of it on the back, for a combination of 4 things that would make it into light play territory. The moderate play, obviously, more and more and more. This has a very similar type of system, but again, it's taken into the effect of like this, like Doppler effect of how severe the damage is. So it kind of loses me. It gets through the weeds here a little bit with this type of information, but again, it's good that this is out here and gives people some sort of idea of like, if I buy a heavily played card from TCG player, this is the types of things that could be allowed and things that are not allowed in each category. So in light play and surface or near mint, things like grime and bending and clear damage is not allowed. Anything that, and they talk about it in this as well, anything that damages the integrity of a card or something that's feelable through a sleeve. And it does say here on damage down here. Oh, you can't see it. Hold on. I'll move it up a little bit. Annotations that can be felt through a sleeve. And that's kind of important as well. Because you can't play a card that you can feel through a card. Legally, you can't play it in a tournament if you can feel any sort of indentation or anything through the sleeve. So yeah, that stuff is automatically damaged, and that's something that is a good definition from something that goes from heavy play to damaged, is that you can feel it through a sleeve. So yeah, this is all great and good. We'll go back up a little bit because this kind of clarifies again. We're talking about defects particularly. Again, this is stuff that's from the manufacturer or in the printing process. It talks about things that damages the card's integrity. Again, if you can feel it through a sleeve, it's automatically damaged. It's talking about things like crimping, miscuts, missing holofill gems, like things on like a Yu-Gi-Oh card in the bottom right corner or in the middle of like a rare card for Magic. Things like that. That would be something that impacts the card integrity of it. Things that damage the integrity or don't impact integrity, or things like ink dots, things like that. That is just a smudge or something like that that you can't feel through a card. Is probably more than like through the inking process than actual like cutting or manufacturing or a defect in the paper or cardstock. And then it talks about, again, this is one thing that I want to hit on here real good, because this is 2 things that were not talked about in any sort of earlier rendition of this on any card site, really. So this is really good to clarify. Two things here. Curling, and they give you an example. 5 millimeters of flex from a card on top of a surface. So I'm going to pull out this Charizard again. It does have some sort of curling to it, as pretty much all WotC hollows can do. I want to talk about curling. I'm going to do a little video about curling that's going to be really interesting very, very soon. where curling has a lot to do with the humidity in the air and the types of moisture present, particularly with new cards, and that you can actually restore a lot of these cards if you do certain things to them. We'll talk about it. It's going to be another video. It's going to be fun. But TCG Player does address curling, particularly bad curling. It has to be 5 millimeters more off the surface of a flat surface for the card. Any flex beyond 5 millimeters should be considered damaged. Because again, if you put it in a card sleeve, you can feel that type of contour through a sleeve, and you'll be able to tell that card if you were shuffling your deck or something like that. So yeah, that's a good definition to have and a good clarification to make. And then talking about centering on the card, again, centering is not something that impacts playability of it, but it is something that people, if you buy a card near mint, you would like it to be centered, and you'd probably like it to be a good cut of a card. Again, that gives the card threshold of 70-30 for a mix-up of something from the top to bottom or left to right. Any stitching beyond that threshold should be a listing with a photo, and then under the condition the card would qualify for if it didn't have the defect. So again, they're wanting you to post any cards that have any sort of centering issues. They want you to put a picture up with it, and then put that aside and just grade it otherwise normally. And again, that's a good clarification, and something that is good, just a good rule of thumb, just because if you buy a card, again, you want it to be well-centered and look good, particularly if you're buying near mint cards. So that is a good rule to put in there. And again, they do have a built-in solution to that with the centering by being able to list a photo, which you can do on TCG Player. So that's a whole kind of a good. What I'm going to say is now probably the golden standard for card conditioning. It's a good overall, a lot of good things to take away from here. Again, point system I think is kind of more complicated than it needs to be, but again, it gives you a good idea of what to expect and a good outline of like what could be allowed and what could not be allowed on these types of conditions. So it's all good information. It's all good to be out there, and I think a good rule to have out there for people just to be able to put out expectations of what to sell and what to buy, and for the condition, what to expect. I'm gonna end it there, guys. Video's already way too long as is, so I appreciate you guys if you hung in there the entire way. Appreciate you guys. Support the channel, support the store, liking, subscribing, all that good stuff. I will see you guys in the next video. Later, guys.